Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Indianapolis Marion County Public Library and the staff for helping set this up today, and all the panelists and moderators who will be here. My name is Zach Adamson. I'm the Vice President of the Indianapolis City County Council. I am Indiana's first openly LGBT countywide elected official. I'm the only serving City Council member who is Latino. And serving in thank you, serving in leadership position. My grandmother was a civil rights activist in the 60s and 70s, working primarily with the issues facing the migrant farm worker community. I want to give my fellow city councilors a chance to introduce themselves. Council Oliver.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is William. If you knew me before I came on the council, you call me Duke. My name is William Duke Oliver, District Number 9. My background in this particular sphere began as a teenager in the early and mid-60s. When I first went to vote, 1966, there was police cars at the polling site. But I voted. I didn't know what they represented. Really, at that point, it was kind of normal, you know, just what you just seen. So down through the years, I became an activist, joined the NAACP, lifetime member. I see several life members here this afternoon. Give them all a big wave there. Wave back. Thank you very much. Thank you. But this is very important. I feel, but many of you out there feel, that what's going on today in today's society, the discourse, the conversation, the name calling, and some of us got together and felt that what's going on all across the country is taking place right now, and what we're about to take place this afternoon. So I want to thank you all for coming. I'm going to get out of the way and now introduce my fellow council, Bob Osley. Mr. Osley.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be here with my two colleagues, and want to give a special thanks actually to both of them, starting with Councilor Duke Oliver, because it was his idea to bring this out and to have this discussion, and to my colleague Zach Adamson, who jumped right in and said, VOP, let's do this. I want to say that this is important for a couple of factors. I was born of an African father who came to America in the late 1940s and met my mother at Purdue. My mother's from Indianapolis. A fourth generation Hoosier. I'm a fifth generation Hoosier, and I'm raised in the sixth generation of Indianapolis native Hoosiers. And I used to hear about race from an outsider's perspective, because when he returned to Nigeria, he would talk about the experiences that he had and the hate that he had experienced when he first came. And with an African-American mother, 93 years old, who will tell you to this day about stories of travel across our country, car travel, family travel, and experiences that she had growing up here in Indianapolis and other places. The challenges that she faced and her family faced when confronted with race. And I never forgot that. And a few years ago, I ran for Secretary of State of Indiana. And I remember going to every single county and thinking about a couple of counties that I was a little wary of, to be frank with you. Not because of anything sort of a personal, physical threat, but just the thought of I would have to confront some issues just based on how I looked. Now, I will tell you that a particular county just south of Marion County has had an amazingly unique reputation for how it dealt with, addressed, confronted folks who didn't necessarily look like the majority of folks who lived in that county. I hope I said that politically well. Was that okay? Yes. Okay. So I got a chance to experience that, not on the negative side, but on the positive side. in that the members of that particular county's political organization actually supported me over my opponent, who didn't look like me. So it gave me this idea that there is hope in this country, that some of the things that we used to take for granted, that there was a strong and strict racial divide, is not necessarily true. But over the last couple of years, we have seen sort of a turning of that, and that's why we're here today. The Southern Poverty Law Center indicated over the last 2 years, we have experienced radical hatred. And that is xenophobic hatred, religious hatred, just a hatred of people who are in any way different than the majority. That's not the America that I have come to know in these last years as an adult. And it's not the America I think that we all believe that we should be living in, or that we should tolerate. And just all of us having a mouth and a voice can make a difference by simply confronting it and not tolerating it. It's those things that we tolerate that grow and fester. So I'm not here to talk. Sorry about that. You know, you give a counselor a microphone and it's over. So let me turn this back over to my vice president, and just want to say thank you for coming out today and being willing to participate in this discussion about hate in our communities.
Thank you, Bob. I just wanted to go over a little bit about the agenda. Today's panel will last about an hour and a half, give or take. And during that panel, we want this to be an audience participation process. So during the panel discussion, if you do have a question that comes up, we want you to take a moment and write it down on the index card that you got when you came in. If you did not get one, raise your hand and we'll make sure that we get one to you. As you fill those out, just raise your hand with the card up in the air and someone will come by and collect that, and they will be turned over to the moderators to ask of the panelists. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can with whatever time is left over. Councilor Oliver, you want to take over?
After the panel discussion, we'll take about 20 minutes and go through some of the questions from the audience. So please make sure you have an index card and fill it out and provide it. We'll be working in the audience, collecting those index cards. So, Bob, if you would step forward, please, and introduce Mr. Cole.
Perfect. I wanted to introduce Carl E. Radford, Jr., a Ball State University grad, a George Washington University grad, with over 30 years of experience in Title VII administration. He is a manager in corporate compliance. He's part of the Department of Navy. He's worked with Raytheon and Navistar, and conducted hundreds of investigations in all aspects of Title VII compliance and allegations. He developed corporate policies and conducted training for more than 5,000 employees in multiple states in diversity and the prevention of sexual harassment. He's also served as a witness and an expert witness on Title VII management in federal court. And many of us actually know him as the father of our really good friend, Cameron Radford. Please. Mr. Radford, Pastor Radford, welcome.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will not call the name of the next moderator. I'll just say a few words and you'll know who I'm talking about. The next moderator, the second one we have, is from Richmond, California, has a BA in Ethnic Studies, and also from Hayward, and a PhD in Public Policy and Public Administration from Auburn University. Currently, she is Associate Professor of Political Science and affiliate faculty member of the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies Program, Peace and Conflict Studies, and Special Assistant. We all know who we're talking about. Here she is, Mrs. Terry Jett, Dr. Jett.
And with that, we will turn this over to the moderators who will now introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Councilor Oliver. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Okay, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists, and I'm honored also to be moderating with Carl Bradford. First, we have Minister Bandy Dupree Aldridge. She is the creator and founder of Love and Full Enlightenment, a page that promotes authenticity and love through enlightenment. She is an ordained minister that promotes spiritual healing and enlightenment of empowerment through music and words, and a member of the Coalition for Women Prisoners in New York City, and a retired opera and classical singer. She has lived in Indianapolis for 10 years and has been fighting against hate and the notions of race as a social construct for over 23 years, and has worked with public sociologists in the field of race, gender, and society, and also facilitated race and church workshops. Minister Bandy Dupree Aldridge. Next, we have Hasim Bada, who is the CEO of True Real USA, a company that raises funds for nonprofit organizations. He is the former Secretary General and CEO of the Islamic Society of North America and the former Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Orlando. Hasim also started his own law firm and practiced in real estate and transactional work. He later became General Counsel for Haven Trust Bank Florida and worked with Bank of America. He is concerned with the spread of the unmosqued phenomenon and general lack of interest in Islam among newer generations. Hasim left his legal career and joined ISNA. He hopes to refocus the organization on strengthening mosques, making them more relevant to more Muslims, and ensuring they are an impetus for advancing the American Muslim community. Hasim received a BS in Mechanical Engineering with honors and JD from West Virginia University. He also received an LLM in Intellectual Property from Washington University in St. Louis. Hasim Bada. Next, we have Cordelia Burks, who serves as Vice Chairwoman of the Indiana Democratic Party, a committeewoman of the National Democratic Committee, and its executive committee representing the Midwestern states. She is a member and the former secretary of the Association of State Democratic Chairs. She recently retired after serving 16 years as the Director of Politics and Legislation in Indiana for the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees International Union. Mrs. Burks has traveled nationally, working in political campaigns. Elected officials nationwide at all levels recognizes her influence. Her life is defined by her advocacy in the political process. Her contributions to numerous organizations and causes are nationally recognized. She is the recipient of many awards, including the Indiana Minority Business Magazine's Rosa Parks Trailblazer of Diversity Award for Political Labor, Government, and Community Advocacy, the Indiana Federation of Democratic Women's Leadership Award. She is also the recipient of Indiana's highest honor, the Sagamore of the Wabash. Recently, she was acknowledged by the Association of State Democratic Chairs with its inaugural Geneva Jones Service and Leadership Awards. Cordelia Burks. Next, we have Rod Bohannon, who is entering his 40th year as an attorney at Indiana Legal Services, where he has dedicated his career to public interest law and advocating for impoverished clients in need of a voice. Over his career, he's practiced in areas such as landlord-tenant law, expungement, and consumer bankruptcy. In fact, he was the one who decided ILS should offer bankruptcy services to clients. And as director of the Ex-Offender Reintegration Project, he oversees and provides legal services on issues that ex-offenders face upon returning to society. He has been a role model and mentor to many, collaborating with young lawyers and getting them excited about community service and philanthropy. Rod is a member of the Indiana Supreme Court Pro Bono Commission and has been involved with many community organizations, including the NAACP Greater Indianapolis Branch and Indianapolis Neighborhood Housing Partnership. He'll be here soon. Karen Celestino Horseman is an Indianapolis attorney who practices in the areas of appeals and litigation. She has litigated several civil rights cases, including cases involving the right to same-sex marriage, Indiana's voter identification law, transgender discrimination, and the right to be named on the birth certificate of a child born to a same-sex marriage. She was the first Latina elected to the Marion County Indianapolis City County Council, and while on the council introduced legislation offering domestic partnership benefits for unmarried couples, including same-sex couples. Karen is currently a member of the Mayor's Council on Latino Affairs and was a founding member of the Indiana Latino Institute. She represents the Indiana Democratic Latino Caucus on the State Central Committee of the Indiana Democratic Party. Karen is second-generation Latina. Her mother's family worked as migrant workers in the West, and because of the discrimination suffered by her mother, Karen has dedicated herself to fighting against discrimination. Karen Celestino, host. Reverend David Green, Sr. is a determined humanitarian, civic leader, educator, and advocate of youth, and a drum major for social justice. Pastor Green has been the dynamic senior pastor of Second Baptist Church, aka Purpose of Life Ministries, here in Indianapolis for 26 years. He graduated valedictorian of his high school class at Cavernor High School with honors from the University of Kentucky with degrees in math and computer science, a summa cum laude graduate of Crossroads Bible College with a degree in religious studies, a Master's of Divinity degree from Anderson University School of Theology. Pastor Green's civic involvement is extensive and in many instances mirrors his passion for youth and social justice. Pastor Green is an active board member of the following organizations: President of Concerned Clergy of Indianapolis, Chairman of Central Indiana Council of Aging, Chairman of Board of Our Kids, Program of Indiana, faith-based leader of RED Alliance, a Breast Cancer Awareness Coalition, and Chairman of American Red Cross of Central Indiana Board, 2014 to 2016. Reverend David Green, Sr. Naima Jackson was not able to be with us today, so now we have Tony Mason, who is President and CEO of the Indianapolis Urban League, has a passion for service, and has dedicated his entire career to initiatives designed to enhance the quality of life for Indianapolis residents. Prior to joining the Indianapolis Urban League, Tony served as the Relationship Development Director of Companies with a Mission, now known as True You. From 2009 to 2012, Tony served as the Senior Vice President of the 2012 Indianapolis Super Bowl Host Committee, and prior to that, he served as the Executive Director of the Circle City Classic for 8 years. He's worked in several administrative positions, including the National Collegiate Athletic Association, NCAA, the Amateur Athletic Association of USA, AAU, Indiana Black Expo Incorporated, Miami, Ohio University, and Wichita State University. Tony has received several awards, including the IBJ's 40 Under 40, Indy's Bright Young Gems Award, the Center for Leadership Development's Achievement in Business Award, McDonald's Black History Maker of Today, and the Black Coaches and Administrators Image of Excellence Award. Currently, Tony is a member of the Indiana Youth Institute's Board of Directors, and he serves on steering or advisory committees with the United Way of Central Indiana, the Greater Indianapolis Progress Committee, Race Cultural Relations Leadership Network, LISC 2020 Great Places, and the Indiana Sports Corporation. Tony earned his undergraduate and graduate degrees from Miami, Ohio University. Tony Mason. I'm going to begin and ask the first question of a couple of our panelists, Hazim Bata and Karen Celestino Horseman. The question is, the act of scapegoating segments of the community as a cause for the trials and tribulations of other segments of the community has become a major political strategy. For example, more recent immigrants, especially Latino immigrants, are often blamed for the lack of job opportunities available to others. This strategy of scapegoating is often used because it is successful. What can we, the public, expect from our politicians and the media charged with holding them accountable regarding the targeting of marginalized communities for political gain?
I would say that this is an excellent question, because this is happening. For those who not be familiar with what scapegoating in this context means, what's happening is that certain politicians are getting people afraid. They're saying that the immigrants, Latinos, they're coming here is going to lead to your loss of jobs, it's going to affect your community, they're committing crimes, all of that. And what they're doing is they're playing to their fears. And so much of discrimination is usually based upon one of two things: fear or power. And in this case, it plays upon both, because these segments of the mainstream community that react to this are people who are fearful of what they don't know. They don't know the immigrant community. They don't know these Latinos. They don't know their customs. They don't know the Muslims. They become afraid of what they don't know. And then they become, it's a matter of power, because now they think their power is being taken from them. So as a community, what we have to do is that when we see a politician trying to play on this, we need to speak up. This is one of those instances where you have to speak up and make your voice heard. And, you know, I can tell you, like, I lost a city council race by 4 votes. And I can tell you on the day of the race, election day, at all the precincts that I had, my opponent had people out there who were saying, oh, she favors men dressing in dresses, and she wants to bring in carloads of Latinos to come in and vote. They had given them an instruction sheet so that if they saw a Latino approaching the polling place, they were supposed to ask them, you know, something in English, and if they didn't answer in English, then they were supposed to follow them into the precinct and challenge them. So, you know, it's playing on that fear. And in the particular district that I was running in had a lot of lower income people at that time. And so they become afraid. And so that's why we have to help educate. We have to make sure that they're not so fearful. We saw it with the LGBT movement. The reason I believe why we're finally able to get same-sex marriage going was because younger people had all kinds of gay friends. People had gotten to know the community, and they realized there was nothing to fear. So that's what we have to do, is help educate, and we have to speak out. When you see a wrong, you gotta speak out.
Thank you. Hassan.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to first thank Councillor Zach. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel, and thank all of you for coming. I just finished reading a book. And when I use the air quotes, it means that I listened to the audiobook. So I'm addicted to audiobooks. It's called Hillbilly Eulogy. And I see. So it's about a young man who grew up in Appalachia. Right, he's a self-proclaimed hillbilly. His parents moved from the foothills of Appalachia in Kentucky to Ohio, which was more industrialized, and his parents worked in the steel mills and things of that nature. And he was talking about the poverty and the social issues that he saw around him in his neighborhood, in his family, addiction to opioids, alcoholism, domestic violence, lack of job opportunities because the nature of the country was changing. Many of these blue-collar factory jobs were being shipped overseas. But he was fortunate. He ended up being able to get out of that cycle. He ended up going to Yale Law School, and he did very, very well for himself. But he's writing a story about what he grew up in. And he mentions that there's, what's the right word? There's anxiety in his community, the white working class community, because they feel that their way of life is now gone, right? Now, this is in no way to justify any of the crimes committed against people of color, but what he says is this is the backdrop, right? This is the situation that many of these white, conservative, right-wing individuals come from, and it doesn't take a lot for somebody in that situation to get brainwashed into thinking that it's your fault, right? Because you're Latino, you're an immigrant, or it's my fault, right? I was born in Cairo, Egypt. I'm an immigrant. When you live in poverty, right, that creates a lot of anxiety within a family, within a community. And human nature being what it is, people are just looking for someone to blame. And so if you get an opportunistic politician who comes along and points the finger at these other people, or an opportunistic journalist or author, whatever the case may be, it's not hard. It's not hard to get one group of people to start blaming another group of people for their woes. Even though it wasn't people of color, it wasn't immigrants that caused this, the nature of the country is changing. Right? The jobs that were lost weren't lost to us, they were lost to China and other parts of the world where these type of lower income jobs are moving towards. So the country has changed. 30 seconds, wrap up. Yes, ma'am. So that's the backdrop. And so what's the solution? You know what? I don't have the answer to that. I'm not that smart. But all I can say is that we have to understand that we are in this together. If our country is doing poorly, it's going to affect everyone. It's going to bring everybody down, regardless of what your color is, regardless of what your gender is, regardless of what your ethnic background is. If the country is doing well, then you know what? A lot of people will benefit. And that's my time. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My question is directed first to Pastor Green, and then I would like a follow-up from Tony Mason. You know, it's one thing to look at hate and bias on the TV screen and on the news. It's something different when it gets personal and you're dealing with it on a personal level. Here's the question. In our struggle against hate and bias, can you identify effective tools to address hate on a personal level and then recommend actions that may be counterproductive to dealing with hate, dealing with it in the wrong way, in essence?
Thank you, Pastor Radford. Let me begin by stating that having this forum on today, this afternoon, is one of the ways to begin to address the issue. Because if we don't have conversation, then you can't resolve an issue that we refuse to talk about. And race is always a sensitive topic, whether it's on jobs, and especially in communities. And for many years and decades, it's been avoided. And when you bring it to Indianapolis, it's avoided in Indianapolis. And as a result, things that are underground continue to grow because they're not addressed. And so just merely beginning, this is a step in the right direction. We have to begin to discuss our differences, the things that are contributing to hate, and move forward. There's a lot of work to be done. There are people that won't even collaborate because they hate. It keeps us from coming together to have a better city, a better community. And because we refuse to come together, then now we're impacted in terms of economics, in terms of education, in terms of housing, in terms of public safety. Because now you have people who may dislike people and really don't know why. Some of it goes back to decades of perhaps their upbringing and their environment. And if they never dealt with those issues, you end up hating people. I myself grew up in the state of Kentucky, and I can remember when my mother and I were riding at a red light and the KKK came up to the window. And I was just a youngster, about 9 or 10, and I'm thinking about, now, what's up with this? And why does this person not like us when we're just trying to get to the grocery store? And got fueled my involvement in saying, you either become a part of that or you begin to work to say, how do we combat this? And that's one of the reasons I'm here today.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. It definitely is an honor to be here. And just to piggyback on Reverend Green's message, dialogue and discussion is great if we can ever get to a level of having truly authentic dialogue and discussion. A number of us on this panel and in this room have participated in the Race and Cultural Relations Leadership Network, which is a part of GYPSY, the Greater Annapolis Progress Committee. And each month we meet and we have a number of conversations and dialogue and discussions around this. And it's been interesting for me, having been in Urban League for 3 years now, because I also know that there are individuals that actually are part of that effort that have lots of concerns about our economy. One gentleman in particular that actually voiced a concern to me around white men losing their place and their voice in society. And so it almost evolved into a confrontation, because I was somewhat taken aback, because this is someone who in my mind I perceive to be very moderate and liberal. And yet to know that there are individuals that are at the table participating in conversations that do actually hold some of these beliefs that we see that are being bandied about each and every day in terms of dog whistle statements and politics. It's frightening. And so how do we continue to come together as a community, have authentic dialogue, be open to the fact that people are bringing their historical, cultural, and social baggage with them, and how do we help them see the social and economic benefits of us being a more collectively diverse and unified community, I think is going to be important. But for us to buy into the counterproductive narrative that's out there now, it's frightening and it's scary. What it reveals to us is we truly are not in a postmodern society yet.
Okay, I'm going to toss this next softball question to Mrs. Cordelia Lewis Burks, because I know she's really going to give us a lot of wisdom and information, and also like the color that she has on today. It's similar to mine. And then also follow up with Minister Bandy Dupree Aldridge, because I like her perspective on authenticity and love, and I think that she can really also answer this question and give us some great information. So the question is, explain your perspective on the current state of hate, both nationally and here at home in Indianapolis and surrounding communities.
I too want to thank the counselors for having this event today. It is very timely. If we notice what is going on politically across the nation, I think technology has made the expression of hate easy. Many times I think of what I hear over the TV. I also feel that the person who sits in the highest office of this land perpetuates hate. And I think perhaps you will be surprised that I would say that, being in the positions that I hold. But it is true whether you agree with me or not. And often I don't care whether people agree with me. My friends know that. His messages, I perceive, allow us to be torn apart. And you know, hate is a tragedy that has no color. We see it expressed behind closed doors everywhere. Messages that our immigrant community will take our jobs away, that the African American community is not capable of having and holding a family together. You might have heard that there is someone running for office in Alabama who thought that during slavery, families were closer together than we are now, and that we are incapable of raising a family and holding a job. Here in Indianapolis, however, I think that our community is truly blessed because we have politicians and leaders in our community who try to bring the races together. I remember a long time ago, and maybe somebody here will recall, when the Jewish community thought that their community and African Americans should come together. And there were a group of women always lead the way, don't they, that brought together African American women and the Jewish women. And I think Faye Williams was one of those women who was instrumental in that, and we must not forget it. But I think the perpetuation of dividing and conquering by politicians is to nester their own positions. I was reading in the paper, and I only read the headlines, and I'm an avid paper reader, but I've been busy this week, where there's a candidate who's running for U.S. Senate who wants to jail the leadership of cities who will not allow the Latino community to be deported from our community. That is an expression of hate, and that is to fester his own basket so that he's playing to the hate of the majority community. that does not help our country. And we have to come together. I look at our institutions, the Urban League, the NAACP, the Women for Change, a lot of the organizations that I'm involved with, whose mission is to bring our different communities together. I look at our neighborhood associations and places like the Children's Museum and our educational leaders whose mission is to bring the community together and not tear it apart. And we must express this to our children at our dinner table. You know, it's interesting that you read the book about the young man from Appalachia. I grew up in Appalachia. I grew up in the county that is most being broadcast on TV, McDowell County, West Virginia, which was the richest county in the country when I was growing up because of the coal mines. But we were able to come together because of the different organizations of where we live. And I'm pleased to live in a town or a city where the leadership wants to see a cohesive community. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for coming, because that's important, because even though they pulled this together, if you guys didn't come out, it would be a waste, because we need everyone to be involved in what's going on in order to make a change. So I'm an implant into Indiana. I'm originally from Louisiana. So I see things a whole lot differently than most people. I was educated in New York and Philadelphia. I did my undergraduate school at a historically black college, went on to conservatory, which was miles of difference from one another, and then went on to perform in Italy and Germany, which the concept is that we don't like Americans. It doesn't matter what color you are, and if you're black, as long as you don't open your mouth and they can tell you're American, you're doing good. So I want to begin by saying we're looking to the very areas that are the fosterers of hate and racism, because racism is an institutionalized thing and it's systemic. We're looking to the creators of it in order to solve it, and that's not going to happen. We're going to have to make that change. We're going to have to bring that change because government passes laws with regard to hate. So we're looking to the very people who pass the laws for hate to rectify and govern themselves in a way that we think should be right when they're sitting up there passing these laws. So we're looking in the wrong place. We have to look at each other, because that's where we're going to solve this whole thing. Because that's our power. We said you're supposed to be our voice, so therefore you should be asking them to be your voice as opposed to their own voice. I think that race has been around for a long time. Hate has been around for forever. Religiously, you name it, every institution that we have promotes it in some way, shape, form, or fashion. You can go in church and there'll be a scripture that tells you something about hate. Another scripture will tell you something about love. So that very institution also is capable of promoting the hate that's around us. One of the ways that we can bring about change is that we have to awaken ourselves to the truth. To say that all of this is new is us not being truthful. And in order to have a conversation, it's not so much about being politically correct as it is about being honest. And if we can't be honest with it, we're not going to get anywhere. We're so busy trying to put salve over it so nobody's feeling. Your feelings are going to get hurt. You can't help it. In order to correct it, your feelings are going to get hurt. We're going to hear some hurtful things. People are going to say some hurtful things because we're going to be shaking the very fiber of their belief. And for most people, their belief is truth, whether that is or not. And just because you believe it doesn't make it true. So in order, like the panel said, we have to communicate, but we can't be fearful and be concerned that, I might hurt somebody and they'll go away. But we're hurting one another every day by allowing hate to continue to grow and build. We're in a mist of darkness and we're afraid to shine light. And we're hoping that in some way, shape, form, or fashion, that cloud is gonna go away if we just all stand around, hold hands, say kumbaya, and say we can do this. But to do this, it has to be ugly before it gets pretty.
You know, I think I'm gonna do this next question a little different because Cordelia Lewis almost answered it before I even asked it. But what I'm gonna do is if there's another panelist that would like to chime in on it. The question is, what are the potential short and long-term consequences of persons in leadership driving division and hate in a democracy? Any of the other panelists want to chime in on that?
Sure. Nothing good can come from what we're seeing and hearing now, whether it ultimately leads to anarchy and chaos out in the streets. I think we also know that whether it's here in Indianapolis or across the country, we've got a younger generation coming behind us that, you know, they cannot relate to what we might perceive to be as progress, even if we see things backsliding now. They can't relate or connect to that at all. And so they are ready to take to the streets. We have had numerous conversations here in this community behind the scenes with city leaders and with others around the fact that we are at a tipping point. And that if we don't start to have these authentic conversations and to address the issues that they see, whether it be police brutality, the police action shooting deaths, and a number of things that we see happening, if we don't, we are headed for a catastrophe. And so we have to continue to have these dialogues, these conversations, and we have to deal with it truthfully and honestly in order to move forward. We have to stay at the table. It's not an option to not participate at this time.
Can I also
Yes.
address that?
Sure.
I'm a big believer in looking back at our history and taking lessons so that we don't make the same mistakes. So let's look back at a little incident. Germany, post-World War I, situation was so bad for the residents there, they were to buy a loaf of bread, you had to have a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks. I mean, they didn't have jobs, they didn't have food, they didn't have housing, they didn't have anything. And then all of a sudden, this charismatic man comes forward in the 30s, and he starts slowly going out and spreading the message that your problem isn't from your creation. Your problem is due to people such as the Jewish community that has all the resources and all the money and all of this. And that message festered and festered and grew. And you ask about the long-range impact, that is probably one of the worst cases in history of what can happen if you don't stop that ball from rolling downhill. So that's why I think that we need to see, I mean, when our president was elected and the campaign was going on, there were a lot of parallels that were drawn, and you can see them. But I do think that today we are a more educated society. I think we are a more loving society, and I see that people coming together like this will prevent something like that in the future. So take our lessons from history.
All right, thank you.
Can I address that?
Sure,
Hello?
of course.
Just briefly, like I said, we should be honest. One of the things is, it's like we're living in Oz, and we don't want to recognize that Oz isn't real. There's somebody behind the curtain, pulling levers and chains and everything. We do not live in a democratic country. We are a republic, and we have to be realistic about that. When we say the pledge, we say, and to the republic for which it stands. We do not say, and to the democratic, we say, and to the republic. So we are just like all of the other great empires. We are the second Rome. And we have to be very careful in the way that we maneuver, because every great empire has tumbled and they have fallen because of themselves and not because of anything outside of it. And that's where we're headed. We're rapidly moving in that direction. So we need to wake up. Oz is not real. There's a little man behind the curtain pulling all the levers. The great Oz isn't real, and we don't have to be fearful of it. Even Oz behind the curtain is scared. That's why he created that machine and that monster. So when we're dealing with it and we say, how long can we do it, or what are the long term? We've been dealing with it forever. It's not new. We're just waking up to it because it was in our faces. Some of us, people of color, have had it in their faces all the time. Every direction you've turned, you've always ran into something that was some stumbling block, some hill you had to climb, some mountain you had to get over. And when we say we must educate, you have to bring reality to a people who believe something that is not real, and that's a hard pill and a tough road, because just like we're not educating them, we are re-educating people in order to understand that things are different, because they believe that they're entitled to certain things. They believe that they're better. That's what Hitler fueled with. We are the best, not them. So therefore, because they have everything that we do not have, we must imprison them. We must take what they have. And taking what other people have had is not new. That's old. We just need to remember, as she stated, our history, because it's repeating itself over and over and over again, because we have short-term memory. And short-term memory will bring you to your bitter end. So we have to wake up and be more alert and be more aware. So we're saying we're woke. Everybody in here believes they're woke. But what are we doing in our community to make sure that we're bringing about change, not just for us, but everyone around us, because we can't live alone?
If I could, just real quick, just a clarification, I'll ask our moderator, who's a professor of political science at Butler. At the local level and also at the state level, we do have a democracy. National level, we have a republic. If we had had a democracy at the national level where we did not have electoral college and it was a popular vote, that would be more of a democracy. And right now, Hillary Clinton would be president, not the person we do have. I have a hard time pulling that name. But Trump would not be something.
You're not asking me to launch into a political science lecture.
No, I'm not. Just,
okay.
Just to certify that that's correct, that's all.
There's truth in that. But when people say we have a republic, it's more considering that we have a representational form of democracy. So it's a form of democracy that we talk about when we talk about having a republic. Where there is some confusion is the behavior of our politicians, where they act like trustees rather than representatives. And so we have to take measures to correct them in that regard and make sure that they know that they are not empowered to make all decisions on our behalf without our ability to speak to them and hold them accountable for those decisions. They need to make decisions based on what we want them to do. And if they don't, then we need to remove them from office. So that's what we do need to know. And remember, that's all I'm going to say. For now. Mr. Bandy got me worked up.
Just take back that power in general. We can speak for ourselves.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so I'm going to actually toss the next question to Hassan Bada and Tony Mason, because of the organizations that you have been involved in and run, and I know you can really respond to this question. Do you believe the mainstream media is doing enough to shine a light on the rise of hate? What can and should they do better? Mainstream media, because we know social media is really doing quite a bit, but it's the mainstream media that we have a lot of problems with. So do you believe the mainstream media is doing enough to shine a light on the rise of hate, and what can and should they do better?
Thank you, sir. Well, I'll say that the mainstream media, that's a big tent. And, you can have very different representations of the world depending on which channel you're watching. So let's just be honest, right? Fox News, right? Fox News is making things worse, right? Fox News is part of the problem. Fox News will have you believe that, I'm just a terrorist waiting to blow somebody up, right? They'll have you believe that it's immigrants and Latinos and LGBTs, and right? They'll have you scared of everyone and everything. right? I watch Fox News just to see what they're saying. Everything is scary on Fox News, right? Immigrants are scary. Socialists are scary. Blacks are scary. Muslims are scary. Europeans are, everyone is scary. So they're making things worse. They're not helping. Other mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, and so on and so forth, it'll vary from event to event. Sometimes they gloss over issues, sometimes they do a better job, but I have found that the most honest coverage that I can find of what's going on in the world comes from shows like The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, The Colbert Report, right? And it's not because I'm a particularly liberal person, but it's, they're not afraid to call out BS when they see it.
Absolutely.
They're not afraid to call out a crime or call out bigotry when they see it. Do they generally lean left? Yes, obviously, right? But they'll call a spade, right? And the mainstream media, for whatever reason, they shy away from doing that. So I generally don't get my news from the mainstream media. I find it from other sources. So that's my answer.
I think I would just like to add, and I don't know if this applies to any of you in this room, but how many of you have watched more mainstream news media since the election than you have in your life? I mean, it's reality television. Mm-hmm. In a very real sort of way. And you're right. The difference between what may be reported on CNN and MSNBC versus Fox or One American Network, it's staggering. And yet I think what arguably is even more frightening is what is out there on social media on a number of platforms that we see some of our young people, and for that matter, older people, that are taking their cues from. And so mainstream, one thing, I think there's plenty of options there for folks, but how do we get our arms around what's being said and done on social media that is driving people to commit heinous acts, whether it's in our state or across the country, but how do we address that and get our arms around that without the issue of censorship? But something has to be done there, because clearly people are buying into extremist messages that also helps to drive some of the dog whistle politics that we're hearing, the messaging from President Trump and from others when things happen, whether it be bombings or issues or fires and things of that nature here in our country or across the seas. So,
Pastor Remus.
I would like to add that I'd like to see national media and even local media become part of the solution when it comes to hate, because much of what sometimes is said further characterizes groups of people from just their perspective and how they paint the picture. Heaven forbid we get into music, etc. Things that are loud, television shows, news, etc., that promote hate, that speak to characterizing certain people certain ways, and that may not be the real way they are. And it helps create that divide, that, okay, I'm against Latinos, I'm against African Americans, and this group of people are poor, and so they lack knowledge in a lot of things, because a lot of people are visual, and we're taking this in. We're impacted by what we're hearing and seeing versus having a message that says, we need to be part of this solution of getting rid of hate. And they can be an integral piece of that with a shift in mindset.
Yes.
One of my mentors, and there may be one or two people in this room, was Bill Pollard, who was the Civil Rights Director for the National AFL-CIO. And Bill tells a story about a woman who had puppies, and she was out to sell her puppies. And she would go, puppies for sale, $1 each. And she did this for 3 or 4 days, and she sold no puppies. So finally she was out and she was saying, puppies for sale, puppies for sale, $15 each, and people were coming to buy the puppies. And someone asked her, why the change in the price? And she said, they are worth more now because their eyes are open.
Absolutely.
I look at all stations. I even will turn to Fox. And I watch C-SPAN every morning because my eyes become open when I hear what is hurting or what is said on C-SPAN. But that is what we must do. I have 4 papers that I subscribe to. Now my newspapers give me more information, and I cut articles out of the newspaper so that my eyes may be open to what is hurting people in this country. You know, many folks will say, why did those people in West Virginia and Kentucky vote for Trump? He gave them hope. He lied, but he gave them hope. And that's why they came. And we must give each other hope, especially those that we see who are hurting. Because it is so important that somebody reaches out, you know, and we've been told at the national level that we did, as Democrats, did not reach out to those in the rural areas. And you know, I have been saying at the Democratic National Committee meetings, we must not think that African Americans can get anybody elected by themselves. I know that half the time, half of us don't come out and vote. And that has been my struggle for years. But it takes all of us, to make this country great and to dispense with the hate that comes from feeling left alone. And I think that is why many folks, now not all, but many folks, feel hate towards another race or an individual. So that's my 2 cents, but you know, we have to open our eyes.
Can I add one thing to this? And this has been, I keep saying I'm going to do this project, but time. But one of the biggest problems, I think, is, and they've talked about, social media. As you all know, that some of the political campaigns and stuff will put together fake news stories, fake blog sites. They disseminate these things, the terrible things. They'll disseminate videos showing immigrants supposedly attacking and all of this. And if you are a person who's already leaning to believing that way, well, here's your proof. But we as a society need to come up with some way to educate people that just because it's on the internet does not mean it's true. And I think we need to start with young. And so I see our CEO of the library, Jackie Needis, is here. By the way, Jackie, you're doing a great job. But one of the programs I've thought about that would be great to do would be to go into the schools, start when they're young, teach them how do you fact check. And then and tell them that they just can't believe all this. And then secondly, do it yourselves. I can't tell you how many Facebook posts that I've responded to saying, not true, check this out, you know, and that's where you need to speak out as well.
Thank you.
All right, I have the next question. You know, this is incredible, Cordelia. You walked right into my next question. This is the second time you've done that. I'm wondering if you have seen my questions or not. But considering in this nation, we've seen some clear differences between rural America and urban America and suburban America. The question is, how can marginalized communities discuss hate with children in a way that both prepares them for the future and empowers them to make a difference? And that is directed to I apologize, our panelists on the very end. I don't want to mispronounce your name, and I can't see it.
Bandy.
All right, thank you.
That's an easy one.
And then I will allow one other person who has a passion to answer that. One other person on the panel has a passion to answer that to follow her.
When we begin to speak about educating our children and preparing them for the world that they're entering into, and hoping that we're also preparing them to bring about a greater change in the world, we have to also remember that we will be educating our children differently, because what my child would experience is going to be different from what another child may experience. And what I mean by that is because my child would be a child of color. So their experience would be drastically different. See, I have to prepare my child when they walk outside of their homes, all of the do's and don'ts that they have to be aware of, whereas I don't have to prepare my neighbor's child who is white in the same manner, because they won't come encounter the same things that my child of color will encounter. I have to tell my child, even though you may follow every direction that is given to you, there's still a chance you might not make it home. See, I have to educate my child differently. So politically, my child is going to be different. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's what makes the world go round. We're not all supposed to be the same. But we do have to recognize that we have differences, and those differences are good. But we're educated to believe that differences are bad. We have wars on everything that would make us a better society. We have war against education. And if we can't educate our children, then we won't be able to get them to be a better citizen, because there's a war against education. Because if I keep you dumb and ignorant to what's going on, I don't have to worry about you making a change. So we have that going on. We have a war against women. We have a war on our children, and our children being able to advance themselves in the proper manner, and that's both intellectually and physically. We have a war on just about everything that exists. So when we're preparing our children, we're educating our children not only in schools, but we need to educate our children in our homes. Now, in order to make them productive and get them politically aware of things, right now children are more politically aware than adults. And they're involved. They were glued to televisions with regard to the election, because there was so much conversation going on about it. Kids know about Black Lives Matter. Kids know about Blue Lives. Kids know more than we do. You know, if you sit and you listen to them and you just let them talk, they will introduce you to a whole lot of knowledge that you're like, where did you get it from? So we just have to be diligent in making sure that the war that is on education comes to a halt. Because right now, for my child, if I had one, they're in a pipeline straight from elementary school to a prison. So that I mean, when we start putting security in our schools for kids in elementary school, then my kids are on a pipeline for prison, because that's the biggest moneymaker we have in this country, prisons. So when we educate our children, we can't just rely on the educational system. We got to do some stuff by ourselves. So when we say fact checking, see, if we don't know the facts, we can't check the facts with our kids, and we don't know where to send them. So we have to educate ourselves in order to educate our children so that they can be better than we are and make changes that we couldn't.
Can I chime in on this? Sure. Thank you, sir. So I have two boys. One of them is in 9th grade, one of them is in 8th grade. My 9th grader last year, one of the students in his class said that you look like a terrorist. And then some other kid was nearby, heard it, he jumped in, he said, yeah, you look like a terrorist. My son's kind of looking at them. And these were people that he would play with. I wouldn't call them, they weren't best friends, but they were acquaintances. They weren't complete strangers. And a third kid chimed in, yeah, you look like a terrorist. My younger son, last year, we were talking about where people are from and things of that nature, and I said to my younger son, you're not from here. My kids were born in West Virginia. No, you're not from here. You're from, I forget what he said, the Middle East or wherever. You're from Arab land or something. It's like, no, I was born in West Virginia. No, you're not from here. My kids, I live in Zionsville. Those are pretty good schools. I have a friend that lives in Carmel. This was a few months ago. Her son, who's in 9th grade, came home and he was kind of distraught. He was quiet. She could tell that something was off. He kept to himself. She spoke to him. Turns out a few of the kids at school started calling him a terrorist. And he was just, for 2 weeks, he didn't really talk to anyone. My neighbor down the street, she's a Muslim. After Trump got elected, she was telling me that her kids, she has younger kids, literally they were afraid to leave the house. So this is what's happening to our kids. This is in America, 2017. This is very real. This is very real. And you're right, Pastor Bandy, kids nowadays, they're very well informed, and kids can be very mean. Sir, your question was about what can we do? So obviously education is going to be one of it. And to a large extent, many kids, they get exposed to people of other cultures and nationalities in school, and it's no big deal for them. So certain kids, they have no tolerance for intolerance, which is great. Other kids aren't necessarily that way. But one of the things that we can do is make sure that your kids know that they have a support system. My wife and I, we address this issue head on with our kids. We don't sugarcoat it at all. We tell them, look, there are people that are going to hate you because you're Muslim, because you have a funny sounding name, because your parents are from other countries, and there's just no other way to say it, right? But they know that we have their back. I told them, if anyone ever gives you a problem at school and your teacher or the principal or whoever doesn't respond appropriately, you tell me, and I will swoop down like a hawk on something like that, right? And so my kids are very confident. Thank you. So education is one thing. Our kids knowing that they have a support system and that their parents or whoever, their guardians have their back makes a big difference for them.
Tony wanted to follow up on that also.
Sure, the Indianapolis Urban League, the National Urban League in particular, one of the things that we have encouraged the National Urban League to do is to do some coalition building, particularly with organizations and entities that are in rural locations. Because the harsh reality of it is that a lot of the rural population, they're experiencing the same issues that you see in urban markets. High unemployment, low wages, low educational attainment, issues around drug abuse, violence, poverty, crime, it's all the same. And so one of the end results has been a dialogue around education and helping rural communities understand the similarities and the challenges that we're facing, and this particularly revolves around the issue of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that the reality of it is that we need more resources in our schools, obviously better leadership, support, and things of that nature, but that until we pull together, you're not going to have these issues be addressed in an equitable manner from a legislative or policy standpoint. And so some of those things I think are slowly starting to happen because, as Ms. Cordelia shared earlier, it's going to take some level of unity because as the African American community, we're not going to solve all of this by ourselves. But if we can call attention to the challenges that we all are bearing and having to deal with, then maybe we can make some progress.
Well, I think I would be remiss, especially as a member of the library board, if I didn't say we're all sitting in the right place in the library, because we have amazing resources here that are available to you, and we really do need to bring as many children as possible to our libraries. And we just opened up our amazing Center for Black Literature and Culture, which is directed by Michelle Hayes. And it has a particular purpose to address all of the ignorance that exists in this community and throughout this country and world. And I can tell you, as a college professor, the level of ignorance that crosses my doorstep at school is really hard to address because I only have a few years to undo the damage that has been done by the time these 18-year-olds come into my classroom. And I'm only hitting a few of the 4,500 that actually come to Butler University. And that's a lot of ignorance, actually. And so we really need to stress how important it is to educate children from day one. Get them a library card, bring them to the library, all the resources you need about all the different cultures and all the different places in the world exist, all the different religions, everything is available, readily available, and plenty of audiobooks. I know you like audiobooks. Plenty. You don't even have to come. You can access everything electronically. So I just wanted to emphasize that We do have resources available, and it doesn't cost you anything. Yes.
As I'm thinking about what we were doing here today and sitting here, to communicate with each other is so important. As I said, I grew up in West Virginia, and my father was a pastor of the Church of God in Christ church. And it was not just an African American church. There were many folks that came to my daddy's church, and Daddy would be invited to some of the poorest communities in West Virginia, and they were not African American homes that we went in for dinner, that they wanted my father to come in. My mother died when I was 11. I was the oldest of 5 children, so I kind of had it out with Daddy every now and then. My classmates will tell you that. But he said to me one night, if I don't respond to those who have less than we do, Cordelia, they will always feel left out, and you will never learn that to give is better than to receive. And I think, there are so many kids. We talk about education, but there are so many kids that is not touched by families that will gather them into their arms and talk to them about hate and about relating to people who are different from them. And that's what we must do. And then many times, our teachers don't have the time to be a teacher and a parent as well. And to talk about the differences in our community. In West Virginia, and I know there's one person here that knows about that, we had Negro History Week. It wasn't a month. And we would go to the Caucasian schools. I went to a segregated school. But we would go and we would sing and we would put on performances and we were welcomed warmly. And I think that is a part of my upbringing. I have more constituents, as they call them, who are friends of mine than many people do. And I feel comfortable because my daddy exposed me to someone other than our community. And I think we must start to think about that. And how can we help? I got a message from my district police. I wasn't at the meeting that night. And my daughter came home and she said, Mom, Sergeant such and such said, don't be trying to correct these kids out in the street because they will shoot her. But I don't let things pass. A young man passed by my house and I said, young man, I know your mother didn't know that your pants are down to your knees. He pulled on, and you know what? The next time he passed my house with some friends of his, he said, that lady's going to get up about your pants being down. So they all start to pull their pants up. We have to start talking to our kids, not only those in our community, but every child. And that is how we dispel hate and the differences between us. We know that there are, but we can be comfortable in talking to them. And then one day, the kids came by and said, and most kids call me Miss Lewis, because they were growing up with my children. That's who I was by itself. Hi, Miss Lewis. I said, how do you know my man? My mother knew you when you were PTA president. We have to start talking to our children, and don't be afraid. And it's a way to do it. It is a way to talk to these youngsters these days. So I sent word to my district policeman. I said, well, I'll be careful about the expression on their face, but I cannot let bad behavior go. And I won't do that.
Thank you. I'm going to direct the next question to Karen, Celestino, Horseman, and Pastor Green also. If it is true that hate stems from fear and fear of the unknown or unfamiliar is a root cause of hate, what can we as a community do to tear down the walls between different communities while still celebrating our differences?
Well, I think one of the things is to get out and move within the mainstream community. Latinos moving within, for example, Muslims moving within the community, showing, showing that you got nothing to fear. That Latino family, the Muslim family, the Asian family, all want the same thing. They want to bring up their children. They want to have a safe place for their families to live. They want all of that. And I think that's the only primary way to be able to do that, is to show them. We have a bridge. In the Latino community, we have different festivals and everything, and I always refer to those as the bridges, because they help the mainstream community come in and take a look at some of the traditions and customs and why certain things are important. And then also, then you have your Latino community going across the bridge back out into the mainstream community and learning. Because let's face it, that fear runs both ways. I mean, when my mom and dad married, my Mexican mother married my Kentucky father, neither family spoke to them. So, it has to start like that, I think, and it's through educating and things like this at the library, the cultural center, and exposing people to things. The bad part is that sitting here today, I know I'm preaching to the choir.
That's right.
To this group. So the question becomes, how do you do outreach to the people who are less inclined? And I think that the only way you can do that is if they see, well, you know what? I ran into this Latino lady and she was really nice. Or this Latino man came and worked at my house. I mean, that's what's done it in the past. It helps remove that fear, because then you see you've got nothing to fear.
Can I comment, please? So, Ms. Karen, I agree with everything that you said, right? It's much harder to hate someone that you know, right? It's easy to hate a stranger. It's hard to hate someone that you know. So I agree with you 100%. But let me play devil's advocate, if I may. When was the last time anyone on Fox News told their constituents, go out and get to know a Muslim or a Latino, right? Why is it that burden is on us as minorities, as victims of this bigotry, right? Why is it that we are asked to assuage the fears and bigotry of those who dislike us, right? So, and again, I say that, and I agree with everything that you said, right? But something about this seems really wrong, right? And I don't have the answer to it, and it's something that bothers me. So I'll just throw it out there, because I'd like some feedback, actually.
Is that question, so is it rhetorical? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Somebody must do it.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I'll just say it goes back to that lack of communication, willingness to collaborate, the fear of you really getting to know another culture. In all honesty, Sunday is the most segregated hour, and many of us are going to go to our respective areas and not make a commitment to working together to understand other cultures. That's something that we say that sounds good, but we don't go execute that. Many times it's not happening at any level, local level, all the way up. And so at the national level, Fox News continues to push their hate, push their separation. And if you don't have togetherness, if we're not willing to communicate, we're not willing to share with each other, it keeps us divided. That's why things like we're doing today is so important. But it can't be we never come back together again for 5 years. That will not be progress.
Yeah, I'd like to add or just touch on a couple of things from a local standpoint. I'll be the first to say I sit here and I stand on the shoulders of Faye Williams and other great leaders in this community that have played a role in attempting to build bridges. And so we talk about what's happening here locally. Earlier I mentioned the Race and Cultural Relations Leadership Network and the Greater Indianapolis Progress Committee, and that there have been dialogues and efforts that have been going on for decades now in that space. I also mentioned the Central Indiana Coalition Against Hate, and I know Amy Nelson is here, with fair housing and the work that a number of our organizations, including the Jewish Community Relations Council, the Muslim Alliance, everyone is working together to try to push towards a bias crimes legislation measure. We also have the African American Coalition of Indianapolis, and we're talking about 13 or 14 organizations, including the Urban League, the NAACP, Black Expo, National Council of Negro Women. You go on and on, that are now in a more unified way, meeting, discussing issues, issuing statements, trying to make sure that everyone understands that there is a voice in the community. And I know oftentimes you hear that narrative that's quite false. Well, there is no voice, no one's doing anything. It couldn't be further from the truth. But I think what we have to understand too is that there's a great deal of work to be done, and these things, it takes time. It takes time and commitment. And so there are things happening, and we have an opportunity, but I think we have to get everybody involved, and we have to remain committed to that, and not just in your physical presence in meetings. You have to step up and support these organizations and the work that's being done in order for it to continue. Because I've learned a long time ago, not a long time ago, but 3 years ago, oftentimes there's not money in advocacy. But you gotta do the work. You gotta do the work, and so we need everybody to jump on board and to get involved. And yeah, I'd love to have your support for the Urban League. If you're not supporting the Urban League, support a number of the other organizations and causes that are out there that are working towards unity.
If I can.
Raise my hand anymore. But to your point, I have a friend in the audience. And I don't know what was the impetus of this. And one day I will ask her, and it will be soon. But I got a call from her, and she said, I'm starting this group. It is called The Discussion. And Cordelia, I have no diversity on the list that I'm going to invite. Can you give me the names of some African American or Latino women who I can invite to the discussion? And we meet at her house once a month. We didn't meet this month. I think it's because it's December. And we have a discussion. We introduce ourselves, give a little bit of our background. But these are women from all diverse areas, some women who've never been involved politically. But that's what we need to do, to reach out and have the discussion among people that we're not used to being with. And that's how we diminish hate in our community, one of the ways. That person is Ann Stack. She came to an NAACP luncheon because I was speaking there. And she took out her membership. And she has been so involved with the NAACP, they presented her with an award. This is how we diminish and get to know each other, by having a discussion.
I'm going to share a brief story, and then I'm going to present a question out to you guys. And if you haven't sent in a question, you may want to answer it on one of the cards. A brief story, I grew up in the South, in Louisiana, and I grew up at the time where there was segregation. I am that old. But I grew up in a family of preachers and teachers. And so my grandmother and my grandfather were educators, so they said, we refuse to allow you to go to a school with books that were discarded years ago from other schools. So I attended private school until they integrated the public schools. So I went to private school. There were a total of 3 African Americans in the school. We weren't all in the same grade, and one of them was my cousin. And so I went from kindergarten all the way through high school with a group of white kids, and I was the only black kid in my class at the time when I was going to the private school. But we all went to public school at the same time, so we all graduated together. So these are kids and people that I went to school with from kindergarten. So you would think we knew one another. I went to slumber parties. They came to things at my home. We knew each other. We entertained one another. We played together. We sang together. We were in band together and all those things. One morning I happened to go to a pep rally, and there was a sign up that said, "Only niggers tear down posters." Well, I had been with the class at the time, so everyone's asking me, well, when did that happen? I don't know. I left by that time. I don't know when that happened. it's not just enough that we're spending time together, because you will still encounter only niggers do something. And I have grown up with them my entire life, and that didn't change that experience for me. So when we say if we get one another involved, it doesn't change indoctrinations that they're having when they're not with you.
Right.
So again, we still are going to encounter who they are deep down inside. All it needs is for something to push that button. That's the story I want to leave you with. My question to the audience is, how many of you on a day-to-day basis when you wake up, you have to code switch? Now, I'm amazed, but I'm not amazed, because not one white person had to raise their hand, because they do not have to code switch. Code switching, and I love living in New York, because in New York, and I lived, I'm going to explain what code switching. I first lived in Brooklyn, and I loved that area, but then I went and I got a townhouse in the Bronx. But you know, you're in this townhouse with people like Flavor Flav and all that stuff, so that's a different experience. But when I moved to Harlem, that was the most wonderful experience I could ever have, and you would watch us go from one being into another. When we stepped on the train, we had on sneakers or something, we had on hoodies. We were who we were as African Americans, and we were the coolest things you ever saw. As we got closer to our stops, you started to see a transformation going on with the people of color. I happened at that time to work on Wall Street. So by the time I got to my stop on Wall Street, my glasses were on, my shoes were changed, my suit was clean. As the Board of Health, if you touched me, you might cut yourself, and I'd hand you a Band-Aid. And I would walk into that building, and I was a totally different African American. I had transformed, and I had assimilated, and the way I spoke with everyone was totally different. And everything about me was different, but at the end of the day, when I got back on the train, and as I got closer to Harlem, everything started to change again, and I could let my hair down. And at the time, I had locks down to here. I could let it down. I didn't have to switch it up and everything. And we were speaking of, what's up? How you doing? Hey, what's up, man? What's going on? Hey, as everything is shaking, everything is cool. That's code switching. Yes. Where I have to be one person in one place, and then when I get closer to my culture and where I am, I can be myself. Right. And so when I say, how many of you in this room have to code switch, I see people of color hands going up, because they understand the change they have to make in order to just make it through the day without there being a problem.
Amen. Well said. Well said. Well said.
Yeah, very well said. I have the next question here. And again, I like to stay with my format again, only 2 responders, but if someone feels stronger, please step up. You know, obviously we live in a global community now. You know, we can see that in terms of how the President of the United States not only impacts us, but impacts the world, and can cause conflict in the world just by a statement. Here's the question. Tribalization implies the possession of a strong cultural or ethnic identity that separates one member of a group from members of other groups. And this is a fact. Human beings are the only animals that walk on earth that are fueled by ignorance and fear. The only ones that harbor hate in their hearts for others of their own species. As the world becomes more global, what role do you think tribalization plays in the development of what groups think as it relates to hate? I know that's a long question, but again, we are animals. For those, remember your science classes in elementary and junior high school. We're a higher species of animals, but we're the only ones that hate. How do we go forward knowing that? Anyway.
Is that to the audience and the panel? I didn't know.
Oh, no, it's out to the panel.
Oh. That's a long question.
No one wants to take a stab at it.
It was so long that everybody's like, what was the question?
Well, that's why I wanted to kind of go slow and break it down.
Tribalization is interesting in itself because, you know, certain cultures are tribes and other cultures are cults. So, so when we are talking about tribalization, we're actually talking about people of color because they were the people who lived in tribes. Europeans had cults. So when we start using just tribalization and globalization, we're talking about how we as people of color would communicate with one another. And we pretty much, at one point in time, didn't have a problem or issue with one another. It wasn't until we started assimilating that we started running into major issues. But I think for us all, I can sit at this table. I'm sitting at this table with several different people of color. I'm sitting at this table with several different African Americans. And we, for the most part, could have potentially all come from a different culture and from a background. Just because we're all black doesn't mean we all come from the same culture. And that reigns true with anyone. And race is a social construct. It's not true. It's, again, Oz and the people behind the curtains pulling the strings. It's not real. So when we start talking about how do we bridge those gaps, the first thing we need to understand is that we are all the same. The things that are different about us are so small and so minimal, but we have made them so large that we have created a problem within a problem of itself, because the first problem is that we believe that race exists. So on top of that, we have now taken the little small differences about one another, because you still put your pants on one leg at a time, right?
No, I jump into
You jump in. All right. So, you know.
I think the question, though, is not just seeing tribalization as people of color. It's that, you know, there's old saying that birds of the same feather flock together.
No, but I went on to branch out to say that we're really not that much different from one another. I went from the word of the meaning of tribalism into how we can branch into us all being together as one and seeing ourselves as one, which is why I said race is a social construct and it's not real and it doesn't really exist, and we're the only people that's keeping it going. So if we come to the understanding that we are all one and the same and there's no difference within us, then we won't be running into the problem of trying to figure out how to understand one another's culture, because you have the right to have that difference in your culture, because you should be able to celebrate it. You know, if you guys had a Christmas tree, but on that Christmas tree it was a Griswold kind of Christmas tree, you should be able to celebrate that. I like to be able to see my tree, so I won't decorate it the same way, and that doesn't make me different from you, that just makes my preference different. And we have gotten to the point that think because we have a different in preference, that means that makes us so different from one another, and we're not. We're all capable of being bigots. We're all capable, but we're not all racist. That's the difference.
Anyone else on the panel want to take a stab at it?
You know, earlier there was a comment that centered around being careful and remembering history. As we know, tribalism drove Holocaust, Nazi Germany. And we see that driving legislation, comments, and things each and every day, to where now we can look at someone who is sitting in the Oval Office, who in his own words, in his own voice, talked about assaulting women. We've got a senator running for a seat in Alabama that is a pedophile, a child molester, and all of these things, they're being overlooked. And so conversations like this, coalition building around what is right, what is equitable and fair, We have to get involved. We have to work towards each other, talk to each other, work together.
Okay, I've got some audience questions that I'm going to pose to the panel, and I want to thank the audience because these are really good questions that need to be asked. So, and I appreciate your patience and listening that you've done and the responses that you've provided. The first question is, and anyone can answer this question, and I think it's an appropriate one to ask right about now. Can anyone on the panel speak about the mental health impact of living in this environment of hate? This environment speaks to the daily witnessing of persons of color being targets of brutality, the impact on children and teenagers, the PTSD, the loss of hope, the restlessness. Who would like to speak to all of that? All of you actually could probably speak to that. Yes, Pastor.
I'll start the conversation. Obviously, when you're in that type of environment, it's far more stressful. And that stress can easily lead into addictions. People look for a way to cope, to deal with it, especially when your entire environment is conducive to division and confusion. And so they're going to look for coping mechanisms, most of which lead to addictions or lead to other depression or other items that are mental health related. So it's a huge, mental health is growing in our community, and some of it's driven by the hate that goes on in our community.
Yes.
As part of my work with the immigrant community, I counsel families who are undocumented that come to me who want to make plans in case their children are born here, but mom and dad may not be. So they have to make plans for what happens now, and this has become a big issue, if mom and dad get deported. What's going to happen with their assets and their children, and who's going to be responsible, and do we want to take them back, take back our 13-year-old who's never been to Mexico and sees this as their country. Living with that kind of stress, fearing the tap on the shoulder at any moment is not an easy thing to do. It's not easy for the adults. It's not easy for the children who go off to school in the morning and wonder, is mom and dad going to be there when I get home at night? So, or as we saw, you're Muslim, and people, you never know when someone's going to look at you and accuse you. I mean, that's a hard thing. I can't imagine what it would be like to have to live like that. And it's going to pay a price, and it is impactful. And, it's not like we got any special service programs for that. So it's a bad situation right now.
I'm not a panelist, but I would like to chime in on this one. Last year, the day after the election, my granddaughter went into her parents' room and she was crying. She was hysterical. And the reason she was hysterical is because she woke up and found out that Trump won the election. The reason she was hysterical is because her best friend, now she's 8 years old, no one had any idea she was paying attention to politics or anything else. Her best friend has two mommies. And she came in the room crying, saying that her best friend's mommy is now going to go to jail because of the election of Trump. So we can talk about children. They pay attention to a whole lot more than what we realize. It has a mental impact on them that would drive her to tears like that. So it's reality. We cannot ignore it. And it has to be dealt with, and that's why we have to engage children when it comes to hate talk, hate dialogue, because they are listening, they're understanding, and they're coming to their own conclusions, and sometimes they're wrong.
Okay, the next question is, do you think there is a correlation between the continuous perpetuation of institutionalized racism and the emphasis on legalizing the right to carry across state lines? That was a great question, no one asked that.
I'll jump in and say yes on that based on, because I'm originally from Kentucky. A lot of people who are proponents of hate, you get to Klansmen, white supremacist organizations. There's a reason why, one, we don't get gun laws in this country that are reasonable. And that's because people want to be able to do that, and they want to continue to, many of them, not all, but many of them have a very separatist, we're better than, and we fear these other people, and we need to be prepared to defend ourselves or attack them. And so they want this. They want to be, I'm scared of the Islamic person, so I want to have a bunch of guns, ammunition, and I want to be able to take it with me. I might need to shoot them and get away with it. That's reality, the reality we live in. Certainly we need to address it, but it's one of the realities that we desperately face, and there's a correlation. And money is a part of the correlation as well, because there's a lot of money to be made if it's all open and, you know, when it looks at weapons and bullets, etc. It's still economics, you gotta follow the dollars.
Institutionalized racism is the reason why we have such a pull and a growth of and a problem with them being able to pass any laws for you not to carry guns. It's my right, and it's my right to protect myself. And so when a part of institutionalized racism is that there are certain things that are created in order to protect the haves from the have-nots. And so the right to carry a gun is so that I can protect what I have from those who have not. So of course there's going to be a correlation between the two. If you look at how us even having policing came about, it was to protect the wealthy from the people who did not have anything. Right. So one of the reasons why racism is always going to be very difficult to battle is because it's institutionalized and it's systemic. It's taught in schools, it's taught in church, and that's what institutionalized really means. It comes through our government. So no matter how many mass shootings occur, if they even begin to talk about gun laws, the first thing that happens is everyone goes out and buys a massive amount of guns and bullets. So because they want to be able to protect themselves, and people who live in fear are always believing that they need to be in a state of protection. So they are correlated, and it's going to be a hard fight.
And now, unfortunately, when you think about the political landscape, and when we have politicians seeking wins no matter the cost, that's an added dynamic that I believe that we are dealing with here. And if you're playing to a base that is shrinking based on polling, then how can I get a win? Is it this legislation? Is it the statement involving Jerusalem? What will it be next week? And that's the thing that we've got to understand, and why it's so critical that we must come together and rally around issues now. Because for some people, this is all about winning. You know, they're not thinking about institutional racism. They probably don't even care about it.
That's because for them, racism is just a way of life. So they don't have to think about it. So they're thinking about it, they just don't think about it and consider it as racism. What they're saying, when they say, I'm losing my power, when they say things are different and this country has changed a lot, they are talking about institutionalized racism. They just don't define it under that word. But that's what all of that is. When I say I can no longer walk around and make you do these things, and I don't still have the power, and I feel as though everything is shrinking around me, they're talking about, I believe that institutionalized racism is being dismantled, and we have to stop this. So I want us in our truth. Yes, absolutely. And when they say take our country back, if you saw some of the rallies, because I like this kind, I don't mean I like it, but I like watching it because people, to me, are amazing. But when you can be in a rally and just stand up and start beating on people of color. You going way back, even to a time you didn't even exist in. When you start saying, I want things to be like slavery, and I think you guys should go back to Africa, don't tell me you don't understand institutionalized racism. You do. You're calling it something else. You're calling it Let's Make America Great.
Okay, I'd like all of the panelists to answer these next two questions. The first one is, what are some of the issues we have in common, those issues which will bring us together as a community?
Can I chime in?
Well, everyone can chime in.
Oh, thank you so much. So, you know, one thing that I'd like to point out, many of the conflicts that we see, whether it's global or on a national scale or local scale, conflicts can be colored in different ways, right? It can be colored by race, it can be colored by religion, it can be colored by a lot of different things. But one of the things that I have noticed, based on my 40 years on this planet, oftentimes there are economic reasons behind it, right? And the reasons that are given on the surface, it's just an excuse. It's a ruse, right? So, as I mentioned, I was born in Egypt, right? So I'm from the Middle East, so I follow what's going on in the Middle East. And you've got organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram and all of these religious organizations. They claim to be religious. There's nothing religious about them, you know? They're gangs that are trying to grab as much money and as much land as they possibly can. Boko Haram, which is primarily in Africa and Nigeria, I've read several articles. They would, you know, when they managed to arrest some of their generals and the people that are higher up, they would ask them to recite some of the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book. We start learning the Quran when we're 2 or 3 years old, right? So this is an Islamic organization. These are some of the top people in the organization. They can't recite a word of the Quran, right? So this whole thing about them being a religious organization has nothing to do with it. Slavery, you know, white Europeans, no offense to my white brothers and sisters, right? They tried to conquer the world and colonize the world. But they didn't want to call themselves conquerors, so they say it's, you know what, we're bringing God to these heathens, right? But they went for the money. They went for the money. There are economic reasons behind it. Why did we kick Native Americans off of their land? It wasn't because they hated Native Americans per se, right? It's they were living on land that had lots of resources, and they wanted the land, they wanted the resources, right? And they'll come up with a million other excuses. So a lot of it is economic, and a lot of it has to do with income inequality, right? World War II started because of income inequality, right? The Holocaust was able to happen because of income inequality. Germany had become so poor, right, because of the restrictions that have been placed on it by the Allies that, you know, anyone comes along and he gives them hope, as you had mentioned, right? Even if the guy's a monster, he gave them hope. So it's income inequality. So this is an issue for a lot. And if we can help address the issue of income inequality, it'll make the issue of racism or conflicts of religion or conflicts of culture and demographics and so on, it'll make it a lot easier to solve.
Who's next?
Livable wages, jobs, and access to quality education. Plain and simple. Affordable housing too.
I would just add to what Brother Mason said, public safety as well. Because that's different for people of color.
I guess I would harken back to the same-sex marriage case. Public opinion really started turning when the mainstream community realized that what these same-sex couples were seeking was a way to get the same protections and securities for their families and their children as they wanted, as the mainstream community had. So I think, I think that if we could focus and let everybody see that we all want the same thing. We want to be able to live our life, we want to take care of our families, and want to be able to nurture our children and everything. And when they can see that that's the same concern, then it becomes like that bridge where everybody can cross back and forth on it. The children and what faced them, the children of same-sex couples, became a huge issue in that legal fight. So I think that those are the things that we have to find that common ground and go after it.
Cordelia.
You know, I often recall the night of the election of 2008, when Barack Obama was elected president. And the Democratic Party had a suite down at the Marriott Hotel, not the Juliet, it wasn't there then. And everybody began to celebrate when he broke through Ohio. And everybody ran to the living room, and I was in this bedroom, sitting on the bed and by myself, just contemplating. I worked in Senator Obama's campaign in Chicago when he ran for Senate, so I got to know him a little bit. And I thought, will this be a good thing? Or will it divide us even more? And John Lightengood, I don't know how many of you knew John Lightengood, but at the time at one time he was chair of the Democratic Party in Indiana when Evan Bayh became governor. And John came in and he said, Cordelia, it will be a good thing. And I said, how did you know what I was thinking? And he said, well, some of us around here have gotten to know you. And then I thought in my prayers, take care of he and his family. You know, a daughter of a Church of God in Christ preacher, the first thing you want to ask God, please take care. And I never thought this country would be as divided as it is now. I was hoping, you know, the Sam Jones of this world and the Dr. Pinckneys of this city promised us things would get better if we stayed the course. And to a certain extent, it got better. But yet there are those who we talked about today who would divide us. And we must open our eyes and not let that happen. We have to reach out to each other and express our differences and our concerns. And we won't reach everybody, but those that we do will carry that message to others. And I hope that's what will come from this gathering today. Because I promise you, I won't give up. And I said one time, and there's a person that heard me say this, she was listening to the radio. I was asked, when will you stop? I said, not until my friend Karen Horseman tells me, Cordelia, you put your lipstick all over your face. And that's when I will stop. And I pray that the Lord will keep my sanity, that my lipstick will never be all over my face.
We can say all of the things that we want to say, but sometimes history will consistently repeat itself because we're slow learners. And so, and I don't mean that negatively, you know, as I stated, I'm gonna keep it real with you. And saying that, I mean in this instance, a wise advisor will tell the king, in order to keep your power, there will be a group of people that you have to elevate. And that group of people that you elevate will keep everything going smoothly for you, and you'll be looked upon greatly. So to say that, I will say that it wasn't so much as hope that he gave, but he gave them elevation when he was running. because what he was saying to them, I would hope that they knew he wasn't going to be able to do those things. But he gave a group of people elevation. The slave owners gave a group of people elevation, even though they didn't give them any more wealth or any more power. See, because the people who were keeping the slaves intact, they got elevated. They didn't get any money. They were poor white people. And in order for things to continue, we talk about economic differences. It's a part of the system. There is no intent for us all to have the same amount of money. There is no intent for us all to have the same wealth. And if we think we can get equality on that, then we're not being realistic about the world that we are living in. So, the whole system of what our politicians will do is continue to tell the people at the bottom who do have more power than the other people at the bottom that they're the reason why you're not getting to the top. And they will do all of the dirty work that the politicians want them to do. They will come out and they will make the wrong votes. They will come out and they will say the hurtful things. They will come out and they will buy those guns. They will do the attacks. They will do all of those things because they think somehow it's going to elevate their situation. It's not. He couldn't bring back the coal mines because they're not using that stuff anymore, and it's not safe and it's not healthy, but they believed it. They bought into it because it made them think that it was going to elevate them past their circumstances. You see, if we could wake up everybody, and I mean truly wake them up, because sometimes when you first open your eyes, you're not quite awake. So if we could truly wake people up and let them know that we're all struggling the same, we're all looking for the same things, we're all seeking the same things, and even when we think materialistically we have arrived, we really have not, because you got that nice big house and that nice car still didn't take you to where the power really is.
Well, let's bring up
Very
our
small group.
Thank you. That's right. I want to honor our timekeeper too. Thank you very much. I'll bring up our counselors, Allison, Oliver, Osceola.
Thank you. I want to take a minute also to thank all of you for coming out today. This was an exciting and first of what we hope will be many conversations of a similar nature. And in order to make sure that we keep you all involved, there are sign-up sheets out at the entrance of this room. So make sure that you get on the list so that we can keep you in the loop of when the next ones are coming. We're thinking probably around February to having the second in a series of conversations. And we will evolve the topics, but they will all sort of be around these similar issues at heart. With that, I want to turn it over to my friend, Councilor Rose.
Thank you. This is also an opportunity to thank the library for hosting us this afternoon. Can we give thanks to the library? And to the library's president, Jackie Needus, who's made the library a safe place to discuss, the topics of sensitivity, and has also made the library a place for people of all backgrounds. So thank you very much.
I need to step out here just a little bit. I want to thank everybody for coming out this afternoon. It reminded me of something that I read a few days ago, more like several years. A debate was taking place right up the street a little bit here, in Pendleton, Indiana. The abolitionist, Frederick Douglass, tried to change people's hearts. The law hadn't been changed at that time. I think it was 1858 or 59. He couldn't stay in Pendleton, Indiana after he gave his abolitionist speech against slavery, which was morally legal at the time, because men changed the law and they said this is morally correct. This is biblical. They point to something, interpretation, misinterpretation. But here we are revisiting a debate, a discussion that took place many years ago on what is morally correct, what is morally wrong. Just those in government just change the law and it becomes morally correct. That is not so. So what we try to do this afternoon and in the future is to say the kind of things, hopefully, that would change people's hearts. And the panelists have done a great job of enlightening me, and I hope you give them a round of applause, please. What I've heard this afternoon is something that I can use in my debate if I should ever encounter someone, and I'm sure I will, on the merits or the morality of the direction that we do not want to continue on. But thankfully, to the moderators, to the panelists, and those of you, we're going to stop them and keep going back toward the future. So I want to thank you all for coming this afternoon, and we look forward to many, many more of discussions like this.